Hi, I'm Greg Hunter, and this is the weekly news wrap-up for Friday, August 23rd, 2013. I'm really just going to concentrate mainly on just two areas. One is the Middle East, lots of sub-stories there, and one is the coming or burgeoning financial crisis. Now let's start in the Middle East with Syria. A big report of a poison gas attack. There is no doubt that it happened. They have the bodies. It's there. This is on the front page of USA Today. As many as 1,300 people reportedly gassed with poison gas. Now, the al-Qaeda-backed Syrian rebels say it was the Assad regime. So does the U.S. The Assad regime and the Russians say, no, a false flag attack. They're just wanting to get into a big old war. There was an emergency meeting just yesterday, or day before yesterday, with the United Nations, and they are promising a thorough investigation. But I'm not so sure that the whole situation is going to wait for a thorough investigation. Remember those U.S. troops and part of the 1st Armored Division that was on the northern Jordanian border, the southern Syrian border? Remember those troops I told you about? The F-16 fighters, the Patriot missile batteries that are also there. Well, one French newspaper is now reporting, and I quote, Jordanian, Israeli, and American commandos moving towards Damascus since August. Let that sink in. Our troops, along with Israelis and Jordanian, our commandos, are moving towards the war zone in Damascus, and they've been doing so since mid-August. Don't think for 1 minute that they're not only going to meet Hezbollah and Assad's troops, but they're also going to meet Iranian and Russian troops on the battlefield. At the very least, this has all the earmarks of a widening regional war, and it could turn into a world war. I mean, this could turn into a world war by accident or on purpose. But now you have the superpower troops directly meeting each other on the battlefield. And then we had Putin and Obama. Obama called off the meeting that he was going to have with Russia next month, at the G20 meeting. He called that off. Now listen, the underlings are talking. But when the two top guys don't want to talk, that's nothing but a bad sign. This war is also spilling over into Lebanon. That the Sunni folks over there are saying that Hezbollah wants to start a wider war. What a colossal mess! And then down in Egypt, let's talk about that. Their civil war is just getting underway. Of course, things got heated after the Egyptian military removed the president, President Morsi, and then things ratcheted up until finally, they started shooting, the Egyptian military started shooting protesters, and the protesters shot back. There's massacres on both sides. Egyptian police were killed, protesters were killed, hundreds of people, although the protesters took it worse than the Egyptian army and the police. But hundreds were killed, thousands were injured, and as I said, it's just getting started, and there is no end in sight. Now, this is an important economical implication, or an economics implication, that the Suez Canal runs through runs through Egypt. 8% of the world's oil travels through the Suez Canal on its way to the Mediterranean and to Europe, largely, through the Suez Canal. 8%. Now, a lot of people say, well, the Egyptians won't cut that off. Listen, it may not be up to them. They get into a knockdown, drag-out, fight-to-the-death civil war, that canal will be closed. You can expect oil prices to shoot up. And then meanwhile, in Saudi Arabia, did you hear about this? Just to show you how crazy and how destabilized the Middle East. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabian prince has asked for asylum in Russia. He defected, and the reason why is because of the big Saudi Arabia crackdown on government dissenters and anti-government protesters. According to this prince that defected, there are more than 40,000 political prisoners there. They have no freedom of speech. They have, no freedom to criticize the government. Ooh, almost sounds like the United States. They're pretty far off. There's been jailings, there have been murders, there have been killings. And according to this prince, he's afraid this uprising could end the same way as it did in Egypt, same way as it did in Libya, and that the royal family would be unseated from power. So he took off, boom, asked for asylum. How long do you think the petrodollar would last, the U.S. petrodollar would last if the royal family was kicked out? How long do you think the U.S. dollar would remain the world's reserve currency after the royal family in Saudi Arabia was kicked to the curb? Not long, which would have dreadful implications, inflationary implications here in the U.S. Well, in the financial world, NASDAQ mysteriously went down yesterday, and you should have seen the CNBC anchors. They were going crazy. I mean, it was a lot of news. It was a mystery, that this thing went down. I'm sure they're going to have some kind of crazy excuse. Remember when the flash trade happened? 1,000 points came off in, like 3 seconds or something, on the stock exchange, and they said, oh, somebody hit a wrong button. Somebody hit a wrong button. It went down 1,000 points. Come on. Well, the CNBC anchors and their guests were saying things like, oh, don't worry, everything's okay, and, there's no real losses, and there weren't any real losses, things like this just happen. Things like this just happen. Really, with all the redundant systems of NASDAQ? I say no way. Things like that don't just happen. And my consultant tipped me off to another unusual thing. And I thought about this when the NASDAQ went down. He called me up a few days ago and said, did you realize in the past several days that Google went down? The New York Times went down? Amazon.com went down? I mean, everywhere from 20 minutes to a couple hours. I think the New York Times was down for a couple hours. Do you know how many redundant systems they have? Tons. The New York Times? Amazon.com, you're telling me they don't have tons of redundant systems? They may make that be down for a split second. You'd never know it. Google, you're saying that Google just mysteriously went down and nobody knows went on and they have no redundancy? Really? And now add that to NASDAQ. And even Maria Bartiromo, the anchor on CNBC, blurted out asking one of her guests, do you think this was some sort of test? Oops. She quickly kind of, changed the subject and glossed over that. Do you think this was some sort of test? Oh, I don't know. My consultant says the odds of the NASDAQ, the New York Times, Amazon.com, and Google all going down sequentially in a matter of, a few days. He says the odds of that are astronomical. Maria Bartiromo, I think she asked the right question for a change. Do you think this was some sort of test? Moody's is doing a review of the debt of the 6 biggest banks. They are Bank of America, Goldman, J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Citi. And they're in the rating agency's crosshairs because, according to Moody's, the next time we have a big, bank failure, a big meltdown, that the government's not going to rush in and save these banks. And that could be detrimental to the bondholders of those banks. Do you think they may, roll a couple of banks together? You think they may have a bankruptcy, take their assets and give them to somebody else? And maybe we don't need 6 big banks. Maybe we just need 3 big banks. Maybe we just need 2 big banks. But according to Moody's, they're worried that the next time we have a financial calamity, that, they're not counting on the government to bail everybody out. Do you think that's just a coincidence? Do you think things like that just happen for no reason whatsoever? I find this outrageous that there's hardly any scrutiny for these bankers. I mean, they've committed money laundering for drug cartels. I've told you all this. For countries on the terror list, they have, they've committed securities fraud, foreclosure fraud. No scrutiny for them. Nobody goes to jail. But the NSA, did you see this? New revelations? I love this. It's also on the front page of USA Today. NSA admits new privacy violations. Here we go. This is my favorite subtitle. Thousands with no ties to terror watched. They don't care what the bankers are doing, and we can't police them because, oh my goodness, we'll shut the system down. But thousands of innocent people are being scrutinized and their data collected, and in reality, it's millions of people. That's the job one for government. Finally, one of the last stories I want to tell you about, and it worries me. It worries me on several fronts. Is the Fukushima disaster, and it's ongoing. I mean, lots of water has spilled out, radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean, millions of gallons, trying to keep that core cool. They're giving the impression it's totally under control. I'm just not seeing it. I don't think so. At any rate, all this water has floated out into radioactive water. It's floated out into the Pacific Ocean. There's a great map that shows it moving around, the Pacific Ocean. And the western United States could be affected negatively with this radioactive water. You may want to, if you live on the west coast of the United States, you may want to go and take a look at that. But I wish they would do more reporting. They're acting like this is no big deal. It's a huge deal. All that radiation hitting the Pacific Ocean, all that radiation floating past Hawaii. That's unbelievable. Thank you so much for coming to the site and supporting USA Watchdog. I know I say this every week, but I mean it. Without you, the site would be a flop. And I also want to thank everybody, and this is the only time of the week I say it, thank everybody for using the donations button. It helps us out. I'm Greg Hunter. That's the way I see it. Once again, thank you for supporting USAWatchdog.com. Oh, and by the way, one last thing. I have got famed investor Jim Rogers on Monday. And if you think that they're not going to try to take your bank deposits and take your 401k plans when we can't sell bonds, you should listen to Jim Rogers. He is one of the big investors, and he says it's coming. Watch on Monday. Again, I'm Greg Hunter. Thanks for supporting USA Watchdog. That's the way I see it.